Hello, my name's Michael Savoldi. I'm a retired professor of animal and veterinary sciences at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona, California. And I was a resident farrier at the W.K. Kellogg Arabian Horse Center, which is located on the Cal Poly campus. I'm sitting here with a very good friend of mine, Gene Armstrong, who was my mentor. We've both been shoeing over 50 years each. And I'll let Gene introduce himself.
I'm of course Gene Armstrong, and I also taught at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, not Pomona, and I taught there for 35 years and retired. I taught the farrier science class 25 years. In 1991, they discontinued the full-time farrier class, and from that time on, I taught horse production and horse classes that were offered there at Poly. Yeah, I guess I have to think about kind of maybe a little history of when I started shoeing horses. Like many young farriers, I had no idea that I'd ever be a farrier. My dad run ranches, cow and calf operations for other people, and I just pretty much assumed that I would probably be doing the same thing when I graduated from Cal Poly. And so as I was going through school, and I was very involved with the horse unit at Cal Poly San Luis, and the horseshoeing class was offered, and I thought, well, that's a pretty practical thing to know if you were going to work on a ranch or run a ranch, to know something about a horse's foot. So I did take the class at Cal Poly from a fellow by the name of Ralph Hoover, which was a Army horseshoer and an instructor in the Army horseshoeing program. So that as far as the curriculum was concerned, it was based around a military background, which I have to think about when I started shoeing horses. Why, there was still some military, and I got to know some military horseshoers and kind of had an idea what the military required, what standard they required, and what they had to do. So anyway, I also have to think back on what really took place in the time I was shoeing horses. Why, there was something like 24 million horses in the U.S., and when I started shoeing horses, it was way lower than that. It was something like, don't quote me on this, but I think it was right around 4 or 5 million horses. And I know in 1965, a lot of these horses were draft horses, and they were required for farming, and so certainly a lot of those horses went out of the scene because of the tractors at that period of time outnumbered horses. So it was a big transitional time when the horse industry started to evolve around more competitions and competitive companion animal rather than a practical working animal, so to speak. So, and when I think about starting to shoe horses, I would say majority of the clientele that you work for were, at least I worked for and was raised around, were practical ranch horse people. When I think about what took place in those days when horses went lame, if somebody had enough experience to think, well, this horse just needs a little time off. It was common for people to turn a horse out for 6 months or a year and then bring him back. And nowadays, and I think partly financial is a lot of people nowadays, they board horses, and so the horse is an expense, irregardless whether you use him or you don't use him. Anyway, I thought that my previous experience, and when you think about tools that horseshoers used in the transition, like nowadays, whether you're talking about hammers, you're talking about shoes, you're talking about all your hand tools, why they have all changed, and there's certainly a lot bigger selection of things on the market that are available that we didn't necessarily have. But anyway.
It's changed a lot, hasn't it, Jim?
What's that?
It's changed a lot since we started.
Yeah, now, if you wanted to buy a hammer or hoof knife, early on in this country, there was only one manufacturer that you could get a hold of that made hoof knives. And if you wanted a hoof knife, you basically got their product. Where as time went on, again, it got a lot more competitive in the tool marketing, as everything else. And I would say that about farriers also. Is when I started shooting horses, it was pretty much open field. There were ranchers and people that depended on their horses, and when they needed a horseshoer, you were probably in a little more higher demand then. Although there is a high demand of horseshoers, but there's a lot more competition involved in it. So,
well, farriers really, when Gene and I first started, if you were to go to a barn to shoe a horse and there was another farrier there, we really didn't talk to each other. We'd be hiding around the corner or something. And that has changed quite a bit, communication between farriers. I already started Cal Poly in San Luis, I think it was around 1968. I was waiting for Gene to get out of the Army because I wanted to take the class from Gene. And I think that was in 69? Yeah, and so I was in. Gene had taught before he went into the Army, but I wanted to wait. So in 1969, I started the farrier school with Gene Armstrong as my instructor. And things were so much different then. The horses were different than we have to do today. Even the type of shoeing is different. So many horses now are more specialized type of shoeing. In those days, like Gene said, a lot of the horses we worked on were work horses or horses that were used for cattle ranches and things like that. And they would get a time to rest. The show circuit was a lot different. The horses would be used certain times during the summer, and then they would be laid up for the winter. And that's when we could really help horses. We could take a lot of the heavy demands that the horse owner puts on us and give a horse a chance to rest and recondition their feet and bring the feet back. Because most of those horses were just pulled shoes, trimmed and turned out. Well, today it's a lot different. We're shoeing horses year-round, and horses don't really get that break for their feet to rest. And so foot management becomes much more difficult. They can put a horse in a truck today and take it any place they want, and so the show season is year-round. And it makes it quite difficult for horses because they don't get the chance for their feet to rest and have a break from all that work. what people need to realize is a foot is very delicate internally. It's sensitive, it's fragile, but we just look at the outside of the foot. And we must start appreciating what is happening to the inside of the foot and change some of our thoughts about how horses are shod and things like that. What do you think about that, Gene?
No, I think that's right on. You know, I was thinking there too. You know, as in the years ago when you're starting to talk about people left horses go barefooted, that was also a thing that was pretty common around farriers, or at least the people I was around. If they had a problem with a horse and he was shod, they would pull the shoes and let the horse travel on his own. And many times the horse would tell you how he needs to be balanced. And a lot of times you could see it pretty rapidly. And I thought this quite a bit in my latter years of shoeing, how sensitive, if you've been under a lot of horses and you studied it and you've been real sincere about it, is that you can look and your eye can pick up capsular distortions. And a lot of times when you're seeing distortions, you could pretty much tell the way a horse moved.
Mm-hmm.
And
we had good mentors in those days too.
Oh,
Those old timers, that was their job, and they knew how to help horses. They knew what needed to be done, and so we had a lot of help from a lot of the older farriers. And I think in some ways we've lost some of that.
Yes.
There's a lot of competition for farriers today, and we've really lost the knack of being able to read a foot and understand what's happening to the foot, both externally and internally. So I remember some of the fellows you worked with, they were hands, you know. We could probably go on for hours just talking about Paul Halsman and Vern Smith and all those. But you could go to those guys and they would tell you exactly what they thought and how they would deal with the situation. And we would try it. And most of the time it was just great help for us. So we did have a good learning experience with the industry was different in a lot of ways than it is today. I think there was more, once you got to know a farrier, then everything just would turn right around. And life made our job a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I was thinking too, you know, is when we talked about the military horseshoer, but also a lot of people that, you know, families had shops. There was always a standard that Grandpa didn't want the standard to go down. So
Exactly.
As a young farrier, why you were going to pretty much keep the standard where Grandpa wanted it, you know. He was proud of his business. That's what he'd done all his life. That's how he made his living. And he wasn't going to sacrifice that by having somebody do...
Well, Grandpa had a lot of experience.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He worked with them. He knew what they had to do.
Yeah.
So that was all good advice. One thing nice about my first textbook with Gene was the Army manual. So if you want to know how the Army shod horses, I think Gene and I could probably tell you. That was quite a horseshoeing book for us in those days.
Well, I think in some respects, there's a lot of things that don't fit our industry now, but at the same time, it was very safe horseshoeing. And if you thought about manning soldiers on horses in all different kinds of country, it was they tried to make it as safe so horses didn't lose shoes and